Hello and welcome back to another art lesson with me, Phelan from Brushstrokes Art School. I hope you're getting on well with some of the drawing and paintings you've been doing to date, and today I would like to talk to you about drawing and just a few simple hints and tips on how to improve your drawing regardless of whether you're a beginner or more advanced in your drawing capabilities. One of the things I notice when I'm teaching people how to draw, apart from the fact that they don't like it, and oftentimes the fact that people don't like it, is they tend to find drawing a wee bit more disciplined than painting. I suppose painting, as I said before, has a lot more colour with regard to the drama and the excitement and the playfulness of how colour works and brushes and fluidity and all of those things. Drawing is much more defined because you have only this nib to work with if you're working with a pencil, and it's very strict and it's very structured, and it goes only where you tell it to go. There's no haphazard accident about it. It can only go where you tell it to go. Now, because of that sense of uncertainty, oftentimes people start their drawings in a very tense fashion. They're tense because they're holding the pencil too tightly and they're holding it too far up. So when you're working with a pencil, or with any drawing implement for that matter, it should be held lightly in your hand. It should be very loose and fluid. It should almost feel as though it's ready to fall out of your hand. And so that sense of relaxation will then transfer up your arm and into your drawing. Whereas if you're holding it very tensely and if you're very tight with it, that same tension will travel up your arm and your drawing will become very tight and very tense, and it'll lack that sense of fluidity, it'll lack that sense of sketchiness. And especially in the early parts of drawing, it's that fluidity and that sketchiness that allows you just to get a feeling, get a sense of what it is you're trying to do. You don't want to be too perfect, you don't want to be too rigid, just exploring. Because as you draw, you don't need to know everything from the beginning. So you're looking and you're observing, and the hand-to-eye coordination is allowing your hand to confirm that which you see, or rather to explore that which you see. So the whole idea of drawing through a system of steps and stages allows us to see what's there and explore it over the first several few stages to become a little bit more familiar and concrete in what we know. So we tend to start our drawings with very light touch to begin with. So that's step one. Never start a drawing in heavy-handed fashion. Start with a very gentle, light touch, so that if you put something down and you don't like it, you can rub it out very easily and you haven't left a mark onto the paper. That brings me to my second point, and that is the rubber or the eraser. Once again, it's been my experience, a lot of people think, oh, as if I'm good at drawing, if I know what I'm doing, I shouldn't have to use rubber, I shouldn't have to rub out. If I'm rubbing out, I'm making too many mistakes, I'm not very good at what I do. And that's a complete and absolute nonsense. You cannot draw without things going wrong. And I'm hesitant to use the word mistakes, because for me, all drawing and painting is an organic process. And by that I mean to say it's full of exploration and experimentation. If you're not exploring and you're not experimenting, you're not pushing the boundaries of what you're doing. And if you're not exploring and you're not experimenting, your chances are you're not making any errors. And if you're not making any errors, you're not learning. It's not what you know that teaches you. It's what you don't know and how you explore those ideas and push that idea out that teaches you everything you need to know about the creative process, particularly when it comes to drawing and painting. But I imagine that's true of everything that we do in life. So you have to learn to make mistakes. You have to learn to be willing to try new things, but as part of that, things will go wrong. You're going to have to bring in your rubber or your eraser and rub that out. It's also used as part of your technique insofar as not just for rubbing at lines you no longer require, but it's also used for blending and for softening and for putting in lights and for taking out lights. So depending on what it is you're trying to do, this is very much a part of your technique, and it's just as important as your pencil is, so bear that in mind. Now, the next thing I'd like to say is that when you're learning to draw, don't allow the detail of what it is you're looking at to confuse you. Whether you're working with a singular object or whether you're working with a multitude of objects, learn to see the basic shapes. Everything, no matter how simplistic or how complex, breaks down into being a circle, a square, a rectangle or a triangle or an oval, either on an individual basis or as a combination of those shapes. So no matter how simplistic or complex, you can break everything down into those basic component shapes. And the advantage of doing that is it trains you to see things in a much more simplistic fashion. So it trains your observation to become much more familiar and help you to understand the difference between what you think you see and what you actually see. And that's very important because it allows us to understand the basic, simple forms that we're looking at. So when you're looking at your shapes, everything, bear in mind that everything is either, as I said, a circle, a square, a rectangle or a triangle. So if you take your square, if you take your circle, they don't have to be perfect. You can see I always use what I call working lines. So I like to try and suggest my shapes just working with my working lines themselves. So if I take my square or my circle or my triangle, just working with those. Now, one of the techniques I like to employ when I'm trying to teach somebody how to draw and get used to a pencil or get used to a pen is take your basic shapes and just go back over them. Just keep tracing over those lines till such time as that pencil or that implement becomes much more familiar in your hands and feels comfortable. So work with spaces or shapes that you're comfortable with. Take random shapes and just pick up a random shape and keep going over and over that shape, over and over that shape, training your hand and your eye to stay on that line so that you're just repeating that shape over and over again. And in doing so, you're giving yourself the opportunity to train your hand-to-eye coordination, but you're also making the pencil or the pen feel much more comfortable in your hands, which is key to your ability to have fluidity in your drawing. The next thing I'd like to say is that regardless of what you're looking at, apart from the basic shapes, ask yourself questions about it. What am I looking at? What is the basic shape? What are the basic shapes? What sits on the top? What sits on the bottom? What is the highest point, the lowest point, the furthest point to the left, the furthest point to the right? Where is the light coming from? Is it a bright light? Is it a soft light? Where are the shadows cast? Are they strong shadows? Are they soft shadows? The importance of asking yourself questions, and this is true of your painting as well, is that we tend to make assumptions when we look at anything. And the problem with making assumptions is we miss out on so much information. When you ask yourself questions, you pick up answers in a way that you wouldn't expect. So by asking yourself a question, you make yourself far more aware of what it is you're looking at. And remember what I said before, that in learning to draw and paint, we must learn to understand the difference between what we think we see and what we actually see. And there's an enormous world between the two. So the difference between what you think you see and what's actually there. And so learning to use that technique of asking yourself questions will help you enormously in breaking down the differences between those two. Once you have a good understanding of what it is you're looking at, you don't have to know everything, but once you have a good understanding, then you can start your drawing with confidence. And we can start off by looking at the basic shapes. So let me take something very simplistic to show you how this idea works. So let me take a flamingo. So for example, let's say I take the idea of a flamingo, and for the idea of the flamingo, I'm going to start with an oval for the head. The head is leaning down. I'm going to put an oval there. I'm going to take a triangle here for the beak, there and there. Then I'm going to take a narrow, long rectangle for part of the neck there, and another one here. And you can see I'm still keeping my shapes very loose. I'm not looking for perfect outlines. For the body, I'm going to take an oval there. Then for the tail, I'm going to take a triangle here. And for the legs, I'm going to take just a line, a little joint at the knee, back in, and the same on this side, slightly straighter. Now as you can see, I've got two triangles, an oval, two rectangles, an oval, a triangle, and a few lines here. And that represents the idea of the flamingo for me. Now, with those shapes, anybody could draw those shapes. It's not difficult, especially with a bit of practice, to learn to draw an oval or a triangle or a circle or a square, whatever it happens to be. Now let's join those shapes up. So if I start and I simply just take the edges off and start to allow those to join up and put a little bit of softness into those spaces. You can see it's starting to come together. The shaping is starting to come together a little into that. And then down to these, I can make those slightly longer. And I appreciate it's quite simplistic, but the idea is just to give the influence that you can see. Now, we take out the guidelines we no longer need. And you can see coming forward from there, the idea of the flamingo. Put in the idea of the eye. About there, I think. Not quite perfect. And you can start to see, now that may be a little bit wide for the neck, we won't worry too much about that. It's just again, it's more just to give you the idea, an understanding of how basic shapes are in everything. So you can see how a few simple shapes became this. Now the next thing, let's say for example, is if you're looking at any object, learn to look for the lights and darks. While the outlines will give you a very good sense of the form, as I've said before in some of the other videos, it is the lights and darks that will create volume and depth and weight. So ask yourself, where is the light coming from? Is it coming from the right? Is it coming from the left? What sort of influence is that having? So even if I go back to my shapes here, for example, if I have light coming from the left on my circle, I'm going to have light coming from the right. I'm going to have shadow on the left hand side, and so that's going to give me a little bit of shadowing around here, and that shadowing is going to be cast into that space. Similarly, if I wanted to make a box out of this, what I would do is I would put another square just slightly higher and slightly to the right. So the same sort of shape, then I join them. 1, 2, 3, 4, and you can see my box shape. Now, if the light in this case was coming from the left hand side, the right hand side will be in shadow, as you can see there, and that will be casting a shadow back here. Similarly, onto the idea of my triangle, if I wanted to make that a pyramid, let's say I put another side just in here, and to shade that, with light coming in from the left hand side, and the shadow from that will be cast out there. So learning to see where your lights and darks are helps you to understand a greater sense of depth and weight and form. Similarly with the flamingo, if the light is coming in from the left or the right hand side, there would be shadow just on the underside of the head here, down around the neck there, down onto the body, down underneath here, and it would be that shadowy form that will give a sense of three-dimensionality and shape and form to it. Now obviously it will be more complex than that because it'll have the shadows from the feathers etc. coming through into those spaces, but just learning to see those basic ideas gives you a sense of form. So just to recap and how that works is that number one, remember you want this implemented pencil to be as comfortable in your hand as is possible. It should be light, it should be fluid, it should feel like an extension to your hand, not an alien implement. 2, the eraser is part of your technique. You have to be using this. If you're not using this, you're not experimenting, you're not exploring, you're not pushing yourself. 3, learn to look for the basic shapes. Everything breaks down into a circle, a square, a rectangle, or triangle, either on an individual basis or as a combination of those shapes. 4, ask yourself questions. What am I looking at? Don't just assume you understand. Ask yourself questions, and if necessary, write down little notes in your prep drawings beforehand to familiarize yourself with what you're doing. And lastly, 5, ask yourself where the lights and shades are once you've got your drawing done. Don't assume that you'll remember. Continue to ask yourself questions. Stop on a regular basis, critique what you're doing, step back and look at it and observe. Ask yourself questions, and you'll be amazed how much more information you'll pick up. And if you do all of these things often enough, it becomes a much more automatic process in all of your drawings. But remember that no two drawings are necessarily the same, because when subject matter differs, so for example, there's a difference, let's say, between drawing a flamingo and drawing a person or drawing a portrait. One is much more complex than the other, and so if it's more complex, it requires a little bit more preparation, it requires a little bit more cognizance as you go along, and a little bit more awareness for the finer details to make it work. Okay, I hope you enjoyed those few little hints and tips. Put them into practice. I'm sure you will find them useful in terms of your ability to improve your drawing. I'll be back again in another few days with another video or a demonstration on either drawing and painting. In the meantime, take care of yourself, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye for now. Bye.